Today's daf is Yevamos daf Zayin, and we have 3 lines from the bottom of daf Vav Amud Beis. Amar Rav Simi Barashi. Today's daf is being learned as a schus refuah shleima for Vadia ben Miriam Leah, Moshe Abba ben Devora bas Mecha, Shmu ben Tehila, Elazar lipa Shalom ben Fega Rachel, Sarah Nechama bas Rus Malka, Baruch ben Rachel, Malka Miriam bas Esther, and Esther Kreindel bas Devora. So we're continuing along in the sugya of Asay Doicha Lois Asay, which is sort of tucked away here in the beginning of Masechtas Yevamos. So the first halacha of the Masechta states that if an erva falls liyibum, there's no mitzvah of yibum. The Gemara in Daf Gimel Amud Beis brought the makar to this halacha, a braisa, that learned it from a drasha. It says Yevamo Yavo Yoleh, and it says V'isha el achoysa lo yisikach litzra legalois ervasa oleha b'chayeh oleha by Yibum, Oleh by Achoisisha, to teach us that there is an Isser Achoisisha b'makom Yibum, so that if an erva, such as an Achoisisha, would fall liyibum, there would be no mitzvah of Yibum. And the Gemara was bothered with a big kasha. Time of the Kas of Rachman Oleh, it's mashma that the only reason there's no Yibum by an erva is because the Torah specifically wrote an extra word in the Parsha of Arayas to teach me that halacha. However, had the Torah not written an extra word, you would have thought there is a mitzvah of Yibum by an erva. Meaning, based on the klole hashas, based on the gedarim of Kol HaTorah Kula, you would have thought that if there's a face-off between mitzvahs Yibum and Isurei Arayas, the mitzvah of Yibum is doicha, the Isurei Arayas, and the Gemara's kasha is amai. Ein asay doicha loisa say sheyesh by karas. In other words, even though the rule is asay doicha loisa say, but as far as we know, the makar is learned out from the fact that the mitzvah of tzitzis is doicha the loisa say of shadnes. The loisa say of shadnes is an ordinary loisa say. So we have a makar that an asay could be doicha, an ordinary loisa say. However, the loisa say of arayas is a loisa say sheyesh by karas, and because it's a loisa say sheyesh by karas, meichatesi an asay could be doicha a loisa say sheyesh by karas. So if asay is not doicha loisa asay sheyesh by karas, why is it that we need a pasuk to tell me that the asay of yibum is not doicha the loisa asay of achisisha and the loisa asay of all the arayos? So the Gemara went through in arichos to show us the exact precise makar that asay is doicha loisa asay, and then try to find maybe a makar to the fact that asay is also doicha alois asay sheyesh by karas. Why would we want to find a makar that asay is doicha alois asay sheyesh by karas? Because if asay is doicha alois asay sheyesh by karas, that would explain why we need a leah to tell me that the asay of yibum is not doicha the lois asay of achisish. And the Gemara made several attempts, meaning there are legitimate bona fide havaminas to maybe be able to prove this concept that an asay is doicha lois asay sheyesh by karas. We had a few on Daf Hey, Mila, Pesach, Tamid. We had a few on Davav, the asay of Ish Imoy v'Aviv Tiro, the asay of V'asuli Mikdash v'Shachanti b'Soicham, and then the Gemara brought another asay that it could be from there we can prove that asay is doicha lois asay sheyesh by karas, and that's the asay of the humas, the asay that Bezdin has to administer misas Bezdin to someone that's chayev misas Bezdin, and it was based on a brisa which the Gemara discussed in great detail in yesterday's daf, and the Gemara is going to continue to discuss in somewhat detail in today's daf. So we just have to recap very, very quickly what the Gemara did on Daf Vav Amud Beis, and that's going to immediately segue into the first part of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. So the Gemara brought a brisa that discussed what happens if there's someone that's chayiv misas Bezdin and it's Shabbos. Should Bezdin kill the person on Shabbos, or should Bezdin not kill the person on Shabbos? On the one hand, there's a mitzvah saseh of a humas. Maybe that's doicha Shabbos. Then again, mechalul le'elmos humas. So maybe Bezdin cannot kill somebody because by killing somebody it's going to involve doing malacha. So the Gemara brought a brisa, maybe yeah, maybe no, maybe yeah again, a back, a forth, and a back, which the Gemara will clarify in today's daf. And the brisa concludes with a pasuk. It says, the word moishvei is extra, and it's coming to teach us that Bezdin is not allowed to administer misas Bezdin on Shabbos. So in yesterday's daf, the Gemara thought that what was that havamina that Bezdin should be able to administer misas Bezdin on Shabbos? At the end of the day, there's an Isser Shabbos. So what would give Bezdin a right to do it? The Torah says there's an asay of a v'humas. But here's the problem. V'humas is an ordinary mitzvah saseh. Shabbos is a lois saseh sheyesh by kares. And I thought aseh is not doicha lois aseh sheyesh by kares. Why then would I need a pasuk to tell me that Bezdin would not administer misas Bezdin? Oh, must be that really aseh is doicha lois aseh sheyesh by kares. So the Gemara says, here's the makar. I have a raya that aseh is doicha lois aseh sheyesh by kares, and if that's the case, that would explain why I need a leah to tell me that the aseh of Yibum is not doicha, the Isser Achaisisha, and all the other Isur Arayas. So what we are right now is with a teretz, meaning we understand now why the price on Daf Gimel Amud Beis needed allowed to tell me that there's no Yiv of a Makam Arayas, because otherwise I would have learned from the fact that we needed a pasuk to tell me that the Aseh of Misas Bezdin is not doicha, the Isser Shabbos, that really without a pasuk, aseh would be doicha lois aseh sheyesh by kares. So if without a pasuk, aseh is doicha lois aseh sheyesh by kares. When it comes to misas bezdin on Shabbos, without a pasuk, you would think aseh is doicha lois aseh sheyesh by kares. When it comes to yibum by an erva as well, and that's why we need a leah. We need the pasuk to tell me that that's in fact not the case. As the Gemara, I hear. However, there is another way to learn the brisa, and there is a way to learn this brisa that when the brisa stated that the Torah had to write the word to tell me that Bezdin is not allowed to give misas Bezdin on Shabbos. It's not because had I not had a pasuk, I would have thought the aseh is doicha the lois aseh, because an aseh can't be doicha a lois aseh of Shabbos, because a lois aseh of Shabbos is a lois aseh sheyesh by kares, ve'ein aseh doicha lois aseh sheyesh by kares. The reason I need a pasuk is because there would have been a different havamina. True. I need a pasuk to tell me that aseh is not doicha Shabbos, because I would have thought that maybe Bezdin's allowed to kill on Shabbos, but not because of a general klal of aseh being doicha lois aseh sheyesh by kares, because really there is no such klal. It's for a more specific reason that's specific to the topic of misas Bezdin on Shabbos, and we begin with what that tzad and what that reason would be. Amar Rav Simi Barashi. So Rav Simi Barashi said, the reason the Tana had a havamina and felt that the Torah had to write the word Moish Vayseichem to tell me that misas Bezdin is not doicha Shabbos is not because without the havamina I would have thought that aseh is doicha the lois aseh, because it's a lois aseh sheyesh by kares and la'olam, like we think in Svara, aseh is not doicha lois aseh sheyesh by kares. The reason we need a pasuk is because otherwise we would have learned that maybe misas Bezdin is doicha Shabbos based on a kal v'chomer. V'hachi kamar. Now says the Gemara of Simi Barashi. Let me walk you through the brisa so you'll understand what the kal v'chomer is. You'll understand what the tzadim of the Tana the brisa was. And remember, this was an interesting brisa. There was a back and a forth, and then a back. Right? Maybe it should be doicha, maybe it shouldn't be doicha, or maybe it should be doicha. Right? Usually it's maybe this, maybe that. This almost like a third side. Says the Gemara, Matni Mekayim Mechalel Moisumas B'Sham Melachos Chutz Me Misas Bezdin Avu Misas Bezdin Dachya Shabbos. So the first side on the brisa is that maybe V'Humas Bezdin's allowed to kill on Shabbos. It says Mechalel Moisumas. Mechalel Moisumas is talking about an ordinary Mechalel Shabbos, a prosta Mechalel Shabbos, but not when Bezdin is going and doing a mitzvah and being Mekayim V'Humas. Why? Why would you think that maybe Bezdin could be Mechalel Shabbos? Is it because aseh is doicha lois aseh sheyesh by kares? Rav Simi Barashi. No, that's not the reason. What is the reason? Here's the punchline. You would have made a kal v'chem. Ma avodah shichamur v'doicha Shabbos. We know avodah is doicha Shabbos. The Kayanim used to do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos, all the karbanos tzibur, even though it involved doing malacha. For example, shchita. They would shech the karban tamid or the musafim, even though it's one of the lamites malachas, but avodah was doicha Shabbos. So kal v'chem. Uma avodah sheichamura, madach avodah which is very chomer. Where do you see that it's chomer? Because v'doicha Shabbos, you see it's doicha Shabbos, yet ritzicha doicha isa. The halach is ritzichas doicha. Rashi says, if there's a ritzeach koyen, and he's doing the avodah, Bezdin would come, they would take him away, and they would give him misas Bezdin. That means the mitzvah of a humas, the mitzvah that Bezdin has to kill somebody, is doicha avodah, even though avodah is doicha Shabbos. Now, how do you know that? That even if the person is mamish, the kohen is by the mizbeach, so the halach is we take him away and we give him misas Bezdin. So Shabbos shenitcha mipnei avodah. So Shabbos, which is more cooler than avodah, because like we said, avodah is doicha Shabbos. Ein edin shetei ritzicha doisa. So certainly ritzicha should be doicha Shabbos. So you want to know what the tzad was that misas bezin should be doicha Shabbos? Not asay doicha lois asay sheyesh beikaros. But I would have thought that there's a specific limud using one of the Yud Gimel Midah Sha'atayr Nidrashas Bem, the Midah of Kal V'Chomer, that Madach Ritzicha is doicha Avodah, Kal V'Chomer it's doicha Shabbos. Why is Avodah more chomer than Shabbos? Because you see Avodah is doicha Shabbos. So Madach Ritzicha is doicha Avodah, which is the chomer, Kal V'Chomer it's doicha Shabbos, which is the Kal. Umayoy Eino the chomer. Okay, so what was the other tzad? That's one side. But the Gemara in the Brisa, before it mentions any psukim, in Svara, it's cheshbening, it's shaklavatarying, right? It's not sure. Maybe it should be, maybe it shouldn't be. What's the other side? Hachikama. The other side was, Kfuras meis mitzvah teichiach. Maybe there's a teichiach on this Kal V'Chomer. There's a pircha on the Kal V'Chomer. Meaning, you don't see exclusively that Avodah is more chomer than Shabbos. Because maybe I can prove from you that maybe Shabbos, in a way, is more chomer than Avodah. Where do you see that? Shedoiches Avodah. Kfuras meis mitzvah is doicha Avodah. Ve'ein doiches Shabbos. But you don't find that it's doicha Shabbos. So where do you see that meis mitzvah is doicha Avodah? So Rashi sends us to a Gemara in Masechtas Megillah, from all places. Daf Gimel Amud Beis, where the Gemara learns out from the extra word that it says in the parsha of the Nazir that the halacha is that if someone's on his way to bring the carbon Pesach and he sees a meis mitzvah on the side, so the halacha is he's supposed to be metamet to the meis mitzvah. So you see that the meis mitzvah is doich avodah. Yet you don't find anywhere that a person is allowed to bury meis mitzvah on Shabbos. So you see that meis mitzvah is doich avodah, it's not doich Shabbos. So on the one hand, avodah is more chomer than Shabbos because avodah is doich Shabbos. But then again, you also find that Shabbos is more chomer than avodah because meis mitzvah is doicha avodah, yet meis mitzvah is not doicha Shabbos. So you want to base a Kal V'Chomer that misas bezin should be doicha Shabbos. Why? Because it's doicha avodah, and avodah is the chomer. I have a pircha. Yeah, it's true. Sometimes you find avodah is the chomer, but sometimes you find avodah is kal. So that's a legitimate teichiach, it's a legitimate pircha on the Kal V'Chomer. Hadar Amar, but then there was another rayena. Then we said, no, maybe not. Maybe really avodah is chomer. What was that other tzad? Kfuras meis mitzvah titcha Shabbos mikal v'chomer. Then the time of the Brisa, again, before any psukim said that, how do I know I'm right? Mechatesi. I'm assuming that kfuras meis mitzvah is doicha Shabbos. You have a pasuk in the Torah that says that it's not doicha Shabbos. You have a pasuk in the Torah that says it. You have a Mishnah that says it. What, you know that for a fact? You don't know that for a fact. So Adarabba, maybe snake kfuras meis mitzvah will be doicha Shabbos. Why? Because of this Kal V'Chomer. Ma avodah she doicha Shabbos, kfuras meis mitzvah doicha oisa. Not the avodah which is doicha Shabbos. You see, avodah is more chomer than Shabbos. Yet kfuras meis mitzvah is doicha avodah. Mivelach oisa. The Shabbos and nitcha mipnei avodah. The Shabbos which is nitcha mipnei avodah, which is the Kal in edin should take kfuras meis mitzvah doicha oisa. The bottom line is the Tana of the Brisa was vackling. He wasn't sure. On the one hand, I have a Kal V'Chomer that says that misas bezin should be doicha Shabbos Kal V'Chomer if it's doicha avodah. Then again, he said maybe not. I'm assuming avodah is more chomer than Shabbos. Maybe Shabbos is more chomer than avodah in a certain way. From where? From a mitzvah. Then he said, I don't know, my whole hanacha that I'm making that from a mitzvah you see that Shabbos is more chomer than avodah might not even be a good hanacha. So in Svara, the Tana Pasha wasn't sure. That's why you need a pasuk. But what's the point? The point is that the reason we need a pasuk it's not because there was a havamina that Mrs. Bezin should be doicha Shabbos because I say doicha lois I say sheish by karos. I say it's not doicha lois I say sheish by karos. The reason we needed a pasuk was because there was a havamina that based on the mid of Kal V'Chomer I would know that Mrs. Bezin has the ability to be doicha Shabbos. We're not finished. Well, the solakadai to make kar dasi asa v'doicha lois I say according to the Amud Beis, the havamina, the first part of the sugya, where we thought that the reason we need Moshe Seichem is because without Moshe Seichem you would have thought I say doicha lois I say sheish by karos. My oyeno de kamar. What was the back and the forth and the back? What was the vackling there? Meaning, what were all these different stadim? Just to explain a little bit better. So the Tana has a havamina that I say should be doicha lois to say sheyesh beikaris. Based on that, I need Moshe Seichem. But then he said, maybe not. What's that maybe not? And then after he said maybe not, but he said again maybe yeah. What's the maybe yes? So we know the first leg of this trip. But what's the second leg and what's the third leg? So the Gemara says, Hachi Kamra. Mani mechayim mechalel ma'isumas b'sham alachas chos misas bezin. Abu misas bezin, dachi Shabbos ta'aseh eseh v'dachi lois eseh. Right? That's the easy side. The first side was that maybe, even though it says in the Torah mechalel ma'isumas, that's a pras, the chil Shabbos. But to the extent that there's an assay, maybe assay would be dachi lois eseh sheish b'kars. Hadar Amar. Then the Tana said, maybe not. When do we say assay dachi lois eseh? That's a lois eseh grade. Lois eseh sheish b'kars, mishamad le the dachi. the theme and the spirit of the whole sugya. That maybe it's true, I say is doichel lois, I say, but who said? Maybe I say is not doichel lois, I say sheyesh beikaris. So what was then the next sad? No, I think it should be doichel lois, I say sheyesh beikaris. Meaning, it sounds like we're countering this argument. I think I say it should be doichel lois, I say sheyesh beikaris. Maybe a regular lois, I say, not a lois, I say sheyesh beikaris. So what's the next sad? He has to be moist of something. No, I think really it should be doichel lois l'sheish b'karis. They're not just spinning their wheels. They're not just going in circles. It's not just v'choyze chalila. So, he's being moist of something. What's that hadar amar? So he told him, Ati aseh, the doichel lois aseh, lav lois aseh chamer mineh. And this line, by the way, is such an important line in the world of raid. The fact that aseh is doichel lois aseh, isn't that a chiddush? Meaning, you understand aseh doichel lois aseh? How could you understand it? A lois aseh is more chamer than an aseh. Yet you find that aseh is doichel lois aseh. Because aseh v'dochel lois aseh. No. So what's the difference if the lois aseh is a regular lois aseh, which we don't understand, or if it's a lois aseh sheyesh b'karis, which we just don't understand a little bit more? Mali chumra zuta, mali chumra rabba. What's the difference if the aseh is being doichel chumra zuta, a regular lois aseh, or if it's a chumra rabba, a major lois aseh? Either way, it's a chiddush. So you can tell me svaris from today till tomorrow. That's the hadar amar. That's the knitch. I got it. I hear the chiluk between a lois and a lois sheyesh b'karis. Yeah, it's an easy chiluk, obviously. Of course it's a chiluk. But at the same time, every asay doichel lois asay is a chiddush. Because the lois asay is really more chama than the asay. And after can you see it's doichel. So if it's doichel regular lois asay, then it should be doichel a lois asay sheyesh b'karis as well. Talmud loim lois savaru. That's why we need a lois savaru. But let's not forget, that was only in the Havamina. That was all yesterday. That was all what could have been Pshat in the Braisa. But Rav Simi Barashi said also nit the Pshat in the Braisa. And that really there was never a tzad that it should be doichel lois sheyesh b'karis. These last several lines, which are very powerful lines because it's a mefurish Gemara, that really I say doichel lois is a chiddush. It's a mefurish Gemara that lois is really Muhammad and Asay, which has a lot of impact on the rate that we spoke about when we began the sugya on Daf Daled. But again, just remember this is all in our imagination, because it's all a havamina. That never really happened. So before we get excited with these lines of Gemara, which by the way the Achronim do, but before we get excited with these few lines of the Gemara, we have to remember it's all a havamina. Oh, but the maskana, this Gemara never happened. The maskana, the whole shak of Atayr in the Brisa wasn't related to Hashem being doichel lois sheyesh b'karis. The whole shak of Atayr in the Gemara was related instead to a kal v'chomer. What's more chomer? Avodah more chomer. Shabbos what's more chomer? We got involved in meis mitzvah, but where we left? We're left at the conclusion of the asay doichel lois asay component of the sugya. Believe it or not, this was it. And the Gemara is really leaving us where it started. And that is, asay is doichel lois asay. We have no makar that asay is doichel lois asay sheyesh b'karis. And if that's the case, why do we need Olel to tell me that there's no yibum by an achisisha and by shararayos? The chura, without a pasuk, I would know there's no yibum. And the reason I would know there's no yibum is because mehechatesa, you should be able to be meyabim. Based on what? Based on the fact that you're doing a mitzvah, you're also doing a lois aseh. And even though it's true, aseh is doichel lois aseh, but as far as we know, that's just an ordinary lois aseh. About lois aseh sheyesh b'karis, even though there were some interesting havaminas to find mekayres, abel maskana, everything seemed to have been knocked down. And if that's the case, we're back to square one. Why do we need Olel to tell me that there's no yibum by arayas? The Gemara now is going to pivot very much me'inyan le'inyan ba'isa inyan. The Gemara is going to go in another direction now, but all with the same kivon to answer that Groisa kasha that the Gemara asks on Daf Gimel Amud Beis. Why do we need the drash of Allah? Zok the Gemara Ella, and that's what Ella always means, right? Ella means we're going in another direction. We're like falling off of what we tried. We tried. I mean, the Gemara made a valiant effort, and blood after blood after blood, to try to come up with an eitzah, how you know that Aseh is doichel lois sheyesh b'karis, and now we're left with Ella. That's the Gemara just lifting its hands and saying, I hear. Okay, we have to move on. So Zok the Gemara, no, we need the Joshua for a different reason. I would have thought, that the Isner, the Erev of Eshesach, was a Dover Shahaya B'chlal. It was part of a general rule. It was part of a group. A group of what? A group of arayas. That says what? That is in the Sabiyah. V'yotzim in HaKlal. And then it left the Klal. It left the Klal where? By every Yibum. The halach is that an Eish Zach that falls liyibum, the Yavam is allowed to marry the Eish Zach. So you would have thought that being that Eish Zach was Hoya B'chlal, for Yotzim and Achlal, the rule is L'lamed, Loy L'lamed Alatz Yotza. It's not only coming to teach about Isra Eish Zach, Ela L'lamed Ala Klal Kula Yotza. It's coming to teach on the entire Klal. And again, let's just chazer over this one point, because even though we know it and we've mentioned it already a few times, but it's just critical to have it at the forefront of our mind as we go through the rest of the daf. And that is, every single Yibum is really a very big chiddush. The reason Yibum is a chiddush is because Yibum begins with two brothers, where one of them is married, he dies, and now the brother that's alive, the Achachai, has a mitzvah to marry the Almana of the Achames. Now that woman really is osir for this brother to marry. Not only is she osir, she's an erva. She's an Eish Zach. She's his brother's wife. Eish Zach is a Chavi Krisos. It's prominently featured in the Parashat Arayos. So this is something that ordinarily would be from the worst things that a person can do. Stating that, the Torah said there's a mitzvah of Yibum, and because there's a mitzvah of Yibum, so now there's a mitzvah for the brother to marry the Eish Zach. But really, it's a tremendous chiddush. So that in Mila Macherim, in every single Yibum, you find that the Torah was matter Yisuri Aras. That's a fact, because every single Yevama is in Eish Zach. Now, in our sugya, what we're trying to figure out is what would happen if the Yevama was also an erva for another reason. Meaning, in addition to being the Achachai's Eish Zach, she's also his Achos Isha. She's also Bita. She's also Im Chamav, some other erva. But the point is that really every single Yibum has baked into it the fact that we're being matter now in the Sereva. Again, restating the obvious, but it's important. So it says the Gemara again. You want to know why? We needed a pasuk to tell me that there's no Yibum by an erva, because I would have thought that the Isser Eish Zach was Hoya B'chal. It was part of the general group of arayas that ordinarily are aser. Yet b'makom mitzvah, you see, it's mutter. So you would have thought that being that b'makom mitzvah, it's mutter, Eish Zach, so maybe other arayas are also going to be mutter b'makom mitzvah, because that's a rule. Davar shehoya b'chlal, v'yotzim and achlal l'lamed, loy l'lamed alatzma yotza, el l'lamed ala klal kula yotza. So maybe Eish Zach is being melamed not only on Eish Zach, but on the entire klal of all the arayas. And by the way, where does that rule say? Where is it? It's in Rabbi Shmuel Eimer. It's one of the Yud Gimel Midah Shatar and Nidreshes Bem. So says the Gemara, maybe based on that Midah, there would have been a Havamino that Yibum should be doicha all that rice, not mitzarasei doicha loisasei, but based on the fact that maybe when the Torah was Matar Eish Zach, using the Yud Gimel Midah Shatar and Nidreshes Bem, applying that tool, that rule, it sort of implies that the Torah was Matar all the other rice as well. So the Gemara is going to go through this. Meaning, what's the makar to davar shehoya b'chlal v'yotzim and achlal l'lamed loy l'lamed alatzma yotza el l'lamed ala klal kuli yotza. Tanya learned to the Bryce, so it says in the Torah v'hanefesh asher toichal basar mizevach hashlomim asher l'Hashem v'tumasa yolo v'nichkasu hanefesh ahim ba'amem. So the pasuk is talking about a person that's tummy. Yes, tumas aguf. He himself is tummy. He's a zav, and he goes now and he eats from basar shlomim. Says the pasuk, he's chayiv kars. Now, Rashi points out that this is the second time in the Torah. This pasuk we just mentioned is the second time it mentions that a person that's tummy is not allowed to eat kachim. The first time it says it more generally. The second time it mentions shlomim. V'hanefesh asher toichal basar misnevach hashlomim. Says the Bryce, shlomim b'chlal kol kachim hoya. Shlomim was included in all kachim. So why then did the Torah single out shlomim? The original pasuk mentioned all kachim. The second pasuk singled out shlomim. Why would the Torah do that? To tell me that the only time this halach is true is if the kachim that the Tamei ate was similar to shlomim. Mash shlomim yuchal and kachim mizbeach. Just like shlomim is kachim mizbeach, right? All kachim can be divided into two groups: kachim mizbeach and kachim bedagabais. Kachim mizbeach is when somebody makes something hektish, and the purpose, the nusach, the nature of the hektish is that this item is going to be brought as a carbon on the mizbeach. Kachim bedagabayis is all other kachim. So shlomim obviously is something that goes on the mizbeach. So says the Gemara that we learn from the fact that the Torah singled out shlomim in the second pasuk, that just like a shlomim is kachim mizbeach, av kol kachim mizbeach, so too the only time a person that is tamei tumas agov and he eats kachim is chayiv kares is if the kachim that he ate was kachim mizbeach. Doesn't have to be a shlomim. It could be a mincha and an oila and a chatas also. But the point is, it has to be similar to shlamim in the sense that it has to be that type of hektish. It has to be kachim mizbech. Yotzu kachim bedek habayis, as opposed to kachim bedek habayis. So the Gemara speaks out what we spoke out already. Hachanami here too. Ha ishasach b'chal kol arayis. So ishasach was included in all the arayis. V'lama yotzu. So why was ishasach singled out? Meaning it was singled out. The Torah says that b'makom yibum there's no ishasach. Hakish alev aloy melacha. To teach me ma ishasach shaya. Just like ishasach is mutter b'makom yibum. Av kol arayis nami shayin. So too all arayis are also going to be mutter. So you want to know why we need a lel? Because without a lel, again, this is all without a lel. But without a lel, I would have thought that there is yibum by arayis based on what? Not asay deichalois, asay sheyesh by garis, but based on dava shahaya b'chlal, v'yotzim and achlal l'lamid, loy l'lamid al atzma yotzo, elo l'lamid al aklal kula yotzo. The Gemara says, midami? No shayches. This is not a dava shahaya b'chlal, v'yotzim and achlal l'lamid. That we say loy l'lamid al atzma yotzo, elo l'lamid al aklal kula yotzo. This is not a tzushtel to someone that's tamei tumas aguf. Where the Torah first said you can't eat all kachim, and then the Torah singled out. You know which kachim really you're not allowed to eat shlamim. To teach me on the whole cloud that what type of kachim did the Torah mean at the first pasuk you're not allowed to eat something similar to shlamim, which is kachim is back. Rather, this is similar to a different one of the Yud Gimel Midah Shatar and Nidrash Spam, which is going to lead us in a very different maskana. Midami hasam over there, cloud be'isr, prat be'isr. In the case of Toma, the cloud, the first pasuk that says that someone that's Tami Toma Sakov is not allowed to eat kachim, it was a cloud of isr. All kachim, it sounded like someone that's tamei tumas haguf is not allowed to eat. Uprat pe'isr. Then we had another pasuk that says only shlamim or only kachim is be'ach. Al zen nemar dava shahaya b'chlal v'yotzim and achlal l'lamid loy l'lamid al atzmoy. Over here, klal be'isur prat be'heter. Over here, it's very different. Over here, the klal said there's an isur arayis v'nichrasu anafashois ha'oisos, and then you have a prat, a parsha of yibum that says that there's a heter ishazach, albeit b'makai mitzvah. But the klal is be'isur and the prat is be'heter. When the klal is be'isur and the prat is be'heter, then it's not a davar shoy b'chlal v'yotzim and achlal l'lamid, but rather holidami ella to a different one of Yud Gimel Midah Shatar and Nidrash Spam. Which one? Davar shoy b'chlal v'yotzim lidim davar achad. If something was included in a klal, and then it left the klal to tell me a chiddush, you can't return the prat to the klal unless the pasuk does it before. Meaning, if something was included in a klal, and then the Torah said a chiddush nifla about this thing, not a clarification of the klal, but a tremendous aberration and anomaly and chiddush. So then the rule is that not only does the chiddush only apply to the prat and not to the klal, but then we say there's nothing about the klal that applies to the prat. And if you ever want the prat to have any association with the klal, you're going to have to tell it to me mafurish. You cannot return the prat to its original klal unless the Torah is going to do a befesh. What's the makar to this? The time we learned to Bryce. What's the example of this? So again, a pasuk in the Torah. It says v'shachat es hakeves b'mkoy ma sheyishchat es hachatos v'sa'oilo b'mkoy ma kodesh ki kachatos ha'osham hu lakoyen kodesh kadosham hu. So the pasuk over here is discussing the Mitzayra. The Mitzayra, when he completes his Torah, so he had to bring a bunch of karbanos. One of the karbanos that he had to bring was an asham, another one was a chatas, another one was an oila, but he had to bring a carbon asham. And the carbon asham was a very unique type of carbon asham. The reason is because after they brought the carbon asham, they would take the dam, put it on the mizbeach, but also take the dam and put it on the mitzayra. Alboyin yodei hayamanis, valboyin ragloi hayamanis. They would start putting it on his toes and his fingers. This is all part of the very esoteric tahira process of the mitzayra. So that pasuk is describing the asham, and the pasuk gets very descriptive and tells us things about an asham that every single child that ever learned Parshas Vayikra or a little bit of Teiros Kayanim, Yavoyu Teirim V'Yisasku B'Teiris. These are the first halachas that little children learn. And it's something everybody knows, and there's no reason in Parshas Mitzayra for the Torah have to start chazering over these halachas. So what did it say in this pasuk that is so surprising? Says the Gemara. It says, V'shachat es hakeves b'mkoy ma sheyishchat es hachatos v'es ha'oilo b'mkoy ma kodesh ki kachatos ha'asham hu la'kodesh. She'ein talmud leimer kachatos ha'asham. Torah doesn't have to say the chatas is like the asham. What does it mean it's like the asham? You do zrika, You do Aktara, you do it in Tzafin, and we know all these things. We know Chattas is an Asham. This is obvious. By the Mitzvah, the Torah has to tell us the Chattas like the Asham. So why did the Torah go out of its way, write extra words to tell me that it's like the Chattas, that the Asham is like the Chattas? The reason is because the Asham Mitzvah was a Dovish Hoye B'chlal. The Torah said Greisa Chidushim regarding the Asham. What Chidushim? The Gemara speaks it out. B'bayin yad, u'b'bayin regel hayamanis. So you have the bayin yad hayamanis and you have the bayin regel hayamanis. So Yachol, you would have thought, listen to this Havamina. Lo yeheton matan domim ve'emurim l'gabe mizbeach. I would have thought that being that it was Yatzel Lida B'davar HaChadosh, it has no shaykhis to the klal of Asham anymore. So there isn't one din about Asham that applies to this Asham. No Zrika? How could you have a carbon without a Zrika? I hear. But Davar Shoyi B'chlav Yatzel Lida B'davar HaChadosh, Yata Yachol, so it is what it is. Nothing I can do about it. So I would have thought there's no zrika. I would have thought there's no aktara. Say murim talmud loymar. So that's why the pasuk had to say ki kachatas ha'ashamu ma chatas tu namat and dama veimurim legabe mizbeach. Just like a chatas needs zrika and it needs aktara murim on the mizbeach. Asham ton mat and dama veimurim legabe mizbeach. Says the Gemara, v'loya hadrakra. Had we not had a havamina, lamaida nafik ulamaida nafik loy nafik. But without a pasuk, you would have thought that this Asham has a din of boyin yodei hayamanis, boyin raglei hayamanis. That's what you're supposed to do with the dam, but you're not supposed to put the dam in the mizbeach, and you're not supposed to put the emurim on the mizbeach. Either way, this, says the Gemara, is a perfect zushtal. This is a perfect comparable to what we're discussing over here in our sugya, because Eishesach was part of a klal of arayas. Arayas are all aser. The yotzo lidoim b'davar achadosh. What's the davar achadosh? That even though Eishesach is always aser b'makom yibum, it's going to be mutter. So what does Eishesach tell me? Oh, just like Eishesach is mutter, so too all arayas are mutter? That's not the midah. That would be the midah if the Torah was telling me an issa related to Eishesach. So then you would say it's a davar shoya b'chlal, v'yotza min achlal l'lamid, lo l'lamid al atzma yotza, el l'lamid al klal kula yotza. But where the prat is a chiddush, where the prat is a kula, so then we have to apply the other rule. Then we apply the rule of davar shoya b'chlal, v'yotza lidayin b'davar achadosh, iyat niyochel achzirah l'chlali, ach niachzirenu l'chakasa b'ferish. So there, if anything, you want to know what the takeaway from Yibum should be? That maybe there is no Eishesach, I don't know, but it's more a kula in Eishesach that we would have to unwind and walk back a little bit if we want to return Eishesach now to its sender, into the parsha of Arayas. Oh, but to tell me that if Eishesach is mutter, Shar Arayas are going to be mutter as well? Absolutely not. The Gemara speaks it out. Hachanami. Havamina Eishesach te ishtaroi. Eishesach, which the Torah was matter, is going to be mutter. Oh, but Shar Arayas law. Other Arayas not. And if that's the case, we're back to square one. We're back to 6 lines from the bottom of Daf Gimel Amud Beis, where this all began. And that is time and the cost of Rachman Olel. Halafach, you would have thought, what? That Yibum is doicha, loisase sheyesh by karis. How's that possible? Einasei doicha loisase sheyesh by karis. Oh, you're going to tell me, because you would have thought that just like Eishesach is mutter b'makom Yibum, so too Shararayis are mutter b'makom Yibum. Just the opposite. Eishesach is davar shoya b'chlal, v'yotzel lidan b'davar achodosh. Eishesach was just removed and distanced and alienated from the whole parsha of Arayas. It's certainly not teaching me anything about Arayas. Right now, where we are, we don't even know why Eishesach is an erva with regards to certain dinim, because we need to find a pasuk somewhere that's going to bring it back. Because otherwise, if the Torah is not going to say kachatas ka'ashamu, that ka'achoisisha Eishesachu, then we're going to be stuck right now. But certainly we can't learn anything from Eishesach. So again, why do we need a leo? I'll tell you. You would have thought learn it from somewhere else. I would have thought that maybe we could learn achoisisha from Eishesach, and then by extension all the other arayas with a mamotzino. A simple pashat of mamotzino. What's a mamotzino? Me'eshesach. Learn it from an Eishesach, meaning nothing fancy. Very, very simple. Just it's pashat Aleph base. Mamotzino is also one of the Yud Gimel Midah Shatar and Drashas Mem. If you find this is true by one erva, so why shouldn't it be true by another erva? Right? Why are we complicating this? I say the chaloisa says sheyesh by kares. We're getting involved in all these shveres sugis and lav shein shava bakoil and lifnei adibur and tader. It's pashat. It's a pashat of amatzin. I was like, what's Yibum? Yibum Torah is matter Eishesach. If Torah is matter Eishesach, why should it be matter Achisisha? What's so special about Eishesach? I don't know, it's an erva, the Torah was matter it. So why would you think Yibum was not matter Achesisha? Ma ishasach mi yavma, af. Right, so Pashat, says the Gemara. I mean, it took us 5 dafim to get it, but it's so Pashat. So the Gemara, it's a Mamatzino. The reason the Gemara didn't say right away is because the Gemara is going to deflect it in the same line, right? We come out, don't even have a whole line for this. Midami, no shneches, hasam, chadi surah, hachatrei suri. Nah, it's not a Mamatzino. What's the Mamatzino? That Yibam is doicha one erva. Oh, that's true. That's a good Mamatzino. So if you can find a situation with this Yibam, and it's going to be one erva, not Eishasach and a Chanami. Good luck. You're not going to find it. Kaid Man Torah. You the Tamar, right? But Lach Man Torah, you're not finding it. So if that's the case, then it's never going to be Negea. Because every single Yibum is going to involve an Eishasach. And if there's going to be another erva, it's going to be another erva. So by definition, there's going to be 2 arayas. If there's 2 arayas, there's no mamatzinu. Because the mamatzinu is that Yibam could be doicha 1 erva. There's no mamatzinu that Yibam could be doicha 2 arayas. So if that's the case, there's certainly not a mamatzinu. The Gemara says, no, let me explain. I didn't mean a regular, traditional, conventional mamatzinu. But what we meant was a mamatzinu metaknech. Maudatem, I would have thought, hoyol ishteri. I would have thought something else. I would have thought that, being that you find that Yibum could be doicha and erva. So if Yibum could be doicha achesisha, it should be able to be doicha. If it could be doicha eshasach, it should be able to be doicha achesisha as well. What are you going to tell me? That it's true it could be doicha and erva, but maybe only one. The regad has to be doicha achesisha. Then by definition, it's being doicha 2. So maybe 1 it could be doicha, 2 it can't be doicha. I have a svara to counter that. I have a svara to say that maybe once it's doicha 1, the fact that it has to be doicha a second one is not a problem. And that's by invoking a concept known as hoyel ve'ishteri ishteri. And the Gemara now is going to take us on a little bit of a digression and show us the makar to this idea of hoyel ve'ishteri ishteri. It's not a long Gemara, it's not a hard Gemara, but it requires an introduction. So there's no way to learn this next Gemara properly without us reacquainting ourselves a little bit with some concepts related to Kadshim. So we'll do it briefly, but it's just push and necessary in order to properly learn this next Gemara. Rashi gets very, very involved, and certainly Tosfos gets even more involved. So just a very, very brief introduction, and that is, it says in the Torah, "V'yishalchu min hamachane kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamei l'nefesh." If somebody's tummy, he has to be sent outside of the machane. So what exactly was the machane? So we know that when the Yidden were in the Midbar, so the way all the Jews were encamped was in 3 machanos. There was Machne Shechina, there was Machne Levia, and there was Machne Yisrael. Machne Shechina, that's where the Mishkan was. Machne Levia was the surrounding area. And then Machne Yisrael, that was the whole Amud Beis Parsais, that was the whole surrounding area from there. But the point is 3 Machnes. There was Machne Shechina, there was Machne Levia, and then there was Machne Yisrael as well. When the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, and they settled in Yerushalayim, there were 3 Machnes there as well. 3 Machnes were different. They weren't in a desert. There wasn't a Mishkan, but rather there was a Beis HaMikdash. So what were the 3 machanos? The Azara, and of course the Kodesh HaKadoshim and the Heichal and the Ulam, they were all Machne Shechina. The rest of the Harabayas, outside of the Azara, was Machne Levia. Yerushalayim was Machne Yisrael. So when you talk about Machnos, once the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael, it's again Machne Shechina, Machne Levia, Machne Yisrael. Machne Shechina would be the Azara, and of course everything within the Azara. Machne Levia would be the Harabayas, and Machne Yisrael would be Yerushalayim Kodesh. Now again, the pasuk says, "V'yishalchu min hamachane kol tzarua v'chol zav v'chol tamei l'nefesh." That any person that's tamei has to be sent out of the machane. However, not all tmeim and not all machanas were created equally as it relates to this halacha. Meaning, different tmeim had to be sent out of different machanas. Very important pashup shan in this Gemara. All tmeim had to be sent out of machna shechina. There's no such thing as a person saying, "I'm tamei, but afal pikein, I'm allowed to enter machna shechina." Now, there are academic cases where it's possible. But any person that's tamei had to be sent out of machna shechina. Only a Mitzayra was sent out of Machne Yisrael. Machne Levia, some Tmeim had to be sent out of, and some Tmeim did not have to be sent out of. So all Tmeim was sent out of Machne Shechina. Skipping to the other extreme, only the Mitzayra had to be sent out of Machne Yisrael. And as it relates to Machne Levia, it depended. Our sugya now is going to discuss 2 types of Tmeim. A Mitzayra and a Balkeri. More specifically, our sugi is going to discuss a mitzayra that's a mechusa kippurim and a balkeri that's a tful yoim. So what does it mean a mitzayra that's a mechusa kippurim? So the tahira, the purification process of a mitzayra was extremely intricate. One of the things the mitzayra had to do was he had to wait at least 7 days, sometimes more. There's a mitzayra musker and there's a mitzayra muchlet, megillah sugya. But the point is, for sure, mitzayra had to wait 7 days. At the 7th day of his waiting, he would go to the mikveh. He would wait until the sun sets. At that point, he would be almost tahar. Almost, very, very close. Almost tahar. He would have to wait until the 8th day. He would have to bring karbanis. And once he brought the karbanis, at that point, he's going to be a regular tar. At that point, he's going to be good to go. Now, this is very, very important. A mitzayra had to be sent out of all 3 machnas. However, once the mitzayra went to the mikvah on the 7th day, and the sun set already on him, at that point, he's allowed to enter machna Yisrael. At that point, he's even allowed to enter machna Leviah. He's still tamei because he's a quote-unquote mechusa kippurim. He still has to bring his carbon. As a result, the mitzayra is not allowed to enter the Hazara yet. But he's allowed to enter machna Yisrael. He's even allowed to enter machna Leviah. The only place that he's not allowed to enter yet is he's not allowed to enter machne Shechina. He's not allowed to enter the Hazara. That's one tummy. The other tummy that we're talking about is about Keri. About Keri is someone that's allowed to enter machne Yisrael, because only the Mitzayra is not allowed to enter Machna Yisrael. However, a Balkeri is not allowed to enter Machna Leviah. The rule is that any person that's Tomei because of Tumah that was Yotza Migufai, that person is not allowed to enter Machna Leviah. So the Balkeri is not allowed to enter Machna Leviah. But we said we're not talking about a regular Balkeri. We're talking about a Balkeri that's a Tful Yom. So what does it mean the Balkeri is a Tful Yom? That means he was Roya Keri. He went to the mikveh. That day, doesn't have to wait. That day, he can go to the mikveh. However, the sun didn't set yet. So once he goes to the mikveh, so the tumah is already miklash kolish a little bit. It dilutes, it weakens the koyach of the tumah to the point that he's not as tamei as he was before he went to the mikveh. But at the same time, he's not going to be tahar until the sun actually sets. Until nighttime, he's not going to be tahar. What's the halacha about a Balkeri Tful Yom? Is he allowed to enter Machna Leviah, or is he not allowed to enter Machna Leviah? So the short answer is he's not allowed to enter Machna Leviah. Stating that, as we're going to see, there was a machlokes amayuraim, whether the isser for a Balkeri to enter Machna Leviah was a Balkeri Tful Yom to enter Machna Leviah is an isser deraisa, or it's only an isser derabbanan. Now Machna Shechina, he's tamei. For sure he's not allowed to enter. No tamei could ever enter Machna Shechina. It's the easiest trivia question to answer. If you tell me you can't enter Machna Shechina, Machna Leviah, that's where it starts getting exciting. Okay, so we're talking about a Mitzayra and a Balkeri, specifically a Mitzayra that's a Mechusa Kippurim, and a Balkeri that's a Tful Yom. As it relates to Lamaisa, the Mitzayra that's a Mechusa Kippurim is allowed to enter Machna Yisrael. That's a Chiddush for a Mitzayra. He's allowed to enter Machna Leviah. It's not a problem, because he's already past the whole Tful Yom stage. He's only a Mechusa Kippurim. His Tumah is super duper diluted already at this point. He's not allowed to enter, however, Machna Shechina. Where the Balkeri Tful Yom is someone that is allowed to enter Machna Yisrael. Balkeri is always allowed to enter Machna Yisrael. He's not allowed to enter Machna Leviah, despite the fact that he's only a Tful Yom. Shaila if it's Midairaisa, or it's only Midirabana, but for sure he's not allowed to enter Machna Leviah, and Machna Yisrael, Machna Shechina, for sure, because he's a Tamei, he's obviously not allowed to enter Machna Shechina. Okay, so we're going to be straddling these two Tmei, a Mitzayra Mechusa Kippurim, and a Balkeri Tful Yom. But there's one more piece that we need, and that is Ma'aseh Shehaya Kachaya. There was a person that was a Mitzayra. It was the 8th day. Today's the day he's going to bring a carbon. He finished everything he had to do. He's going to bring his karbanis. It just so happens that the 8th day fell out on Erev Pesach. Now, Erev Pesach is the year that all Klal Yisrael would get together in Yerushalayim, and in an absolutely beautiful scene, they would all bring their karbanos Pesach. And this Yid wants to bring his carbon Pesach as well, which is fine. It worked out. Because today's his 8th day. If it was the 7th day, we'd have a problem. But it's his 8th day. In the morning, he's going to bring his karbanis. And as soon as he brings his karbanis, he's going to be fine. Now he'll be tahir like all the other Yidin are tahirim. And like this, he'll be able to bring his carbon Pesach. A Mitzayra can't bring a carbon Pesach. But it's fine. He's not going to be a Mitzayra anymore. Because he's going to bring all his karbanis he has to bring in the morning. And by Bein Arbayim, by Chatzos, by the afternoon, he'll be able to bring his carbon Pesach. You know what happened? He was raw carry that day. That day he was raw carry. And then he went to the mikveh. So right now he's about carried full yom. He has a little bit of an issue. The reason he has an issue is is because in order for the Mitzayra to bring his karbanas, ironically, we just had it in the previous Gemara, no shayches, but we just had it in the previous Gemara, the Mitzayra is going to have to bring a karban asham, and the dam of the asham is going to have to be placed on Boyin Yadei Hayamanis and Boyin Raglei Hayamanis. And the place that's going to have to happen, right, you can't do it at home. Right? You can't have, someone's going to come to your house and he's going to put the dam on your, that doesn't work that way. Right? So this is something that had to be done l'fnei Hashem. It had to be done in the Makom HaMikdash. The problem is, he can't walk into the Makom HaMikdash because he's a Balkeri Tful Yoim. And a Balkeri Tful Yoim can't go into Machna Leviyah, let alone walk into the Azara. So if that's the case, he's stuck. So what's he supposed to do? On the one hand, today's the day. Tomorrow is Shainos. If he doesn't do this today, he's not going to be able to bring the Karban Pesach. He wants to bring the Karban Pesach. Lamanigara. Right? This is his opportunity to bring the Karban Pesach. So for him, it's critical to be able to go into Harabayas and to go into the Azara, for him to be able to bring the Karban Pesach. The problem is he's about carried full yoim. And because he's about carried full yoim, he has a little bit of an issue. So the question is, how do we go about it? What exactly are we supposed to do? This is the backdrop. This is the concept of what's going on over here. When the Gemara is going to prove the idea of Hayil v'Ishtari Ishtari, and why are we proving Hayil v'Ishtari Ishtari? To explain Ulai, maybe, with an Aleph Ze'ira, Ulai, why we needed Aleh. Zok the Gemara, Ma'al the Tema. You want to know why we need Aleh, because I would have thought Hayil v'Ishtari Ishtari, that maybe there's a new svara called Hayil v'Ishtari Ishtari. No, Tema, I'm reading Hayil v'Ishtari Ishtari. How do you know that you say Hayil v'Ishtari Ishtari? The time we learned to the Bryce, Mitzayr, Shechol Shminish Leib Erev Pesach, Mitzayr, where the 8th day fell out on Erev Pesach, Keri Bay Bayoy, and he saw Keri Bay Bayoy, and V'taval, and he already went to the mikvah. Why did he go to the mikvah? A kasha for Maisa. For now. But he went to the mikvah. Amru Chachamim, the Chachamim said, Afal Bisha ain't full yoim achan nichnas, even though ordinarily a full yoim is not allowed to enter the harabayis, zen nichnas. This full yoim is allowed to. Why? Mutav sheyave yaseh sheyesh baikaris, v'yitcha yaseh she'en baikaris. Because we're going to say that the aseh of Pesach is going to be doicha, the aseh of yishalchum and amachana kol tzruv v'chol zav v'chol tomav l'nefesh. So we want the aseh sheyesh baikaris of Pesach, because if a person doesn't bring the Karban Pesach, he's chayv kares, to be doicha, the ordinary assay of a Balkeri Tful Yoim that's not allowed to enter Machna Leviyah. So again, what was the problem? The problem is this person is not allowed to even come on the Harabayas. Why not? Because he's a Balkeri Tful Yoim. Balkeri Tful Yoim is not allowed to enter the Harabayas. So says the Gemara, Amru Chacham, don't worry about it. Because we're going to say not assay doicha lois assay, and not assay doicha lois assay sheyesh by kares, but assay doicha assay. More specifically, asay sheyesh baikaris doicha asay she'en baikaris. So what exactly is asay doicha asay? So B'ezras Hashem will have a very detailed related raid bite as it relates to the concept of asay doicha asay. But says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan added to this, and he said, Dvar Torah afilu asay last bite. That really midday raisa for Balkeri Tful Yoim to go on the Harabayis is not even an Isser asay. Why? Because it's only an Issa D'Rabban. So it's not even an Issa D'Rabban. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "Vayamid Yoshafet Bekal Yehuda Lefnei HaChatzar HaChadash." My Chatzar HaChadash, Yoshafet stood in the Chatzar HaChadash. Why was the Chatzar called the Chatzar HaChadash? Rabbi Yochanan said, "Shechidushu B'Dvarim," because they were saying chidushim in this Chatzar. What was the chidush for Amru? They said, "Tful Yoim Lo Yikanis L'Machna Leviyah." So it sounded like this was a chidush. All this was an Issa D'Rabban. But the bottom line is, we have a Mitzayra, it's his 8th day, it's Erev Pesach. He needs to go into the Harabayas, and in order for him to do his Taira, you have to take from the Dama Asham, put it al Boyin Yodei Ayamanas, al Boyin Raglei Ayamanas. The problem is he's also about carried full Yom. About carried full Yom is not allowed to enter the Harabayas. Stating that it's okay. Why? Either because Yaveh Yaseh Sheyesh by Kares, V'yitcha Yaseh She'en by Kares, or even more pashat. Yaveh Yaseh D'Iraisa, Shnel Karban Pesach, V'yitcha Yaseh D'Rabbanon, of a Balkeri Tful Yoim, that's not allowed to enter Machtuv. But there's one more issue. You know what the issue is? And this is where the punchline is going to be. The issue is that when the Mitzayra did his Taira, what did he do? He walked into the Harabayas. He went through the eastern gate. That's the way everybody entered the Makom of the Azara. And he would stand by Shar Niknar. Shar Niknar was one of the Sharim into the Azara. He would stand literally by the Shar, and he would stick his hands and his toes inside the actual Azara, and the Kohen would take the dam of the Asham, and that's where he would put the dam of the Asham in. Now, why didn't the Mitzayra walk into the Azara? Just come, shine a hide. Why are you standing there? Your fingers are flying in the air. Just walk in. The reason is because he's a Mitzayra that's still Tameh. Now, even though his Tumah is super diluted, all he is a Mechusik Yiburim, but at the end of the day, he's a Tameh. And if someone's Tameh, he's not allowed to enter the Azara. Okay. stating that he was allowed to enter his fingers and his toes into the Azara. That's also a Chiddush. There's a sugi Masechta Zvachim, the third parak of Masechta Zvachim, whether Bia b'mikzah Shma Bia or Bia b'mikzah Sloi Shma Bia. We're going to learn the Gemara, the way Rashi learns the Gemara, Lemanda Amar, that Bia b'mikzah Shma Bia. So really what the Mitzayra did was a Chiddush. Because even though he's only sticking his fingers and his toes into the Azara, Abadas is a Bia b'mikzas, he's entering b'mikzas with part of his body, and Bia b'mikzas Shma Bia. So why was he allowed to do it? Because the Torah says he should do it. That's how he has to become tar. There is no other way to become tar. So if that's the way he becomes tar, it has to be L'fnei Hashem. So you're not taking the dam of the Yashim outside of the Azara. So he had no choice. And because of that, this is what he had to do, and there was no other option. So really, when we say that the Mitzayra, that's a Balkerit Ful Yoim, is allowed to walk in and he's allowed to enter the Azara or enter the Harabayas, we're saying two Chedushim. We're saying that the Balkerit Ful Yoim is allowed to walk into the Harabayas. We're also saying that he's allowed to do a Bia b'miktzas. He's allowed to stick his fingers and his toes into the Azara. So here's the punchline. Bishloim, the fact that we allow the Balkerit Ful Yoim onto the Harabayas, I understand. You know why I understand it? Because for a Balkerit Ful Yoim to enter the Harabayas is in the worst case scenario when I say, in the best case scenario, it's only an Issa D'Rabban. However, for him to do a Bia b'miktzas in the Azara, that's for sure an Issa D'Iraisa, number one, because now he's entering Machna Shechina, and not just that, it's an Issa D'Iraisa sheyesh by Karas, because he's still Tameh this Yid, and because he's still Tameh, the bottom line is it's a Chi of Karas. So what's matter that? You're going to tell me that the Aseh of Pesach is Doicha the Issa sheyesh by Karas? We've gone through that already. That doesn't work. So if that's the case, L'chura, how is he going to make himself tar? He's a Mitzayra, Shechal Shmini Shaloi Liyas Be'erev Pesach. He became a Balkari and he was toivel for the Balkari. Don't worry about it. Just go. Why? Yaveh Yaseh Sheyesh by Karis, V'yitcha Aseh She'en by Karis. Yaveh Yaseh Sheyesh by Karis, V'yitcha Aseh D'Rabbanan. That a Tful Yom is not allowed to enter Machna Leviyah. Yeah, that explains how the Tful Yom is allowed to be on the Harabayas, but it doesn't explain how he's allowed to put his fingers into the Azara. V'amar Ula, here's the punchline. So Ula in Zvachim Lamed Beis said, you know what the pshat is? Matam. Why is that second part okay? Because once you find that the Torah was matter, the Bia b'miktzas for the Mitzayra, even though he's a Tameh, Hayol the Ishtari, the Torah was matter for the Mitzayra, so Ishtari, Huta l'kiruya, we say that even though he's a Balkari, it's going to be mutter as well. So what do you see from here? You see there's a svara called Hayol Ishtari. That once the Torah was matter, the Mitzayra to do a Bia b'miktzas in the Azara, into Machna Shechina, so to the Torah would be matter, the Balkari can do the same thing. Says Okti Gemara, maybe that's why I need all that. Because really every single Yibam involves an Eishazach. But the Torah was matter the Eishazach. So we'll say Hayol Ishtari Isser Eishazach, Ishtari Nami, Isser Achis Isha, or Ishtari Nami, whatever other ever it's going to be. Meaning it's a Mamatzino with a knetch of a Hayol Ishtari. Okti Gemara. I hear very, very gishmak. But the Gemara says I'm still not 100% Sefridim, because Teinach, that's all good. Now we're going to get into lumbus of Yevamos for a few lines, and then Amir Hashem will exhale. Says the Gemara, that's all good. That's all good. If so the Gemara says, Mi dami l'Ula, is this really the same as what Ula said? Teinach, that's all good. Meaning, in the event that you have an achos isha that fell a yibam, which means that really this woman is an erva, then based on number one, she's an eshazach, and number two, she's also an achos isha. So, now, bishloima, if the mace Ruvain died first or got married first, and then afterwards Shimon got married, then it's good. Because the migu the ishtari isser eshazach, being that the isser eshazach became mutter, ishtari nami achis isha. The isser achis isha is going to be mutter as well. Again, let's just go through this a little bit more carefully. Right, this is the first real Yevamos case we have. Heichod and Asameis, if Reuven gets married first, remember, Reuven and Shimon are both married. Really, in your classic Yibum case, you don't need Reuven and Shimon to both be married. You just need Reuven, he's the Achames to be married, obviously, but you don't need Shimon to be married. If Shimon's married, it can create complications, but you don't need Shimon to be married. But in this case, you do need Shimon to be married, because we're discussing the Erva of Achis Isha. So if Reuven's wife is going to be Shimon's wife's sister, then that sort of implies that Shimon is married, right? So, Reuven is married and Shimon is married. Says the Gemara, if Reuven got married first, that means Reuven's wife was an Eishes Ach to Shimon before she was an Achis Isha to Shimon. Reuven's got married. At that point, his wife becomes an Eishes Ach to Shimon. Then later Shimon goes and marries his sister, which obviously he's allowed to do. And then she also becomes an Achis Isha. But the Eishnes Ach happened before the Achis Isha happened. If Shimon would get married first, and then Reuven would get married, meaning Shimon's married, and then Reuven marries Shimon's wife's sister, so then the Isser Achis Isha would have gone into effect before the Eishes Ach. Because before Shimon ever married Reuven's wife's sister, before Reuven's wife's sister became an Eishes Ach, she was already Achis Isha. So the Gemara feels that as it relates to the Lumdis, the din of Hoyel Ishtari Ishtari, the order matters. Meaning, Bishloimo, Hechadanasa Mes, Vachach Nasachai. If first Reuven got married and then Shimon got married, so first the Eishes Ach was Chal and then the Achis Isha was Chal, then you could say, oh, Vishtari Ishtari. The Migu, the Ishtari Isser Eishes Ach, being that the first Isser, the Eishes Ach is being mutter, Ishtari Nami Isser Achis Isha. So then the second Isser, the Achis Isha will be mutter as well. But in the event that first Shimon got married and then Reuven got married, so then Isser Achis Isha Kadam. Then the Isser Achis Isha came first. So Mehecha Teisi, if the Isser Achis Isha comes first, you say Hoyel Vishtari Ishtari. What's the Hoyel Vishtari Ishtari? If one Isser is mutter, the other Isser is mutter. Maybe Hoyel Vishtari Ishtari is only true if the first Isser is the one that became mutter. But if the second Isser is the one that became mutter, not. And by the way, the Gemara will speak this out, but let's just speak this out now already, because that's really the case of Hoyel Vishtari Ishtari with regards to the Mitzayir and the Balkari. First he was a Mitzayir, he's been a Mitzayir now for a long time, and then afterwards he became a Balkari. So Hoyel Vishtari Mitzayir, which came first, Ishtari Balkari, which came second. But the Gemara continues, Vafilu Nasa Meis Nami, and even if Reuven got married first, even then I don't know for sure if you can unequivocally apply the rule of Hoyel Vishtari Ishtari, because Teina Chechad Nasa Meis, V'Meis V'Achach Nasa Chai. That would make sense in the event that it was Nasa Meis, Reuven got married first, Umeis, and then Reuven died, V'Achach Nasa Chai. After Reuven died, then Shimon went and married Reuven's wife's sister. So the Achos Isha was Chal after the Isser Eishes Ach already became mutter because of Yibum. The Chazila Beni Beni. Where there was a tkufa, there was a period of time where this woman was already mutter mitzad Eishes Ach. Now Shimon went ahead and married her sister. So now she's also an Achos Isha. So then you could say, Hoyel V'Ishtari Eishes Ach. Not could have been mutter. Was mutter b'payil. Right now, she's an Eishes Ach that's mutter because of the mitzvah of Yibum. So then you would say, Hoyel V'Ishtari Ishtari, Ela Nasa Meis, V'loi Meis. But if Reuven got married and didn't die yet, then Shimon went ahead and married her sister. So over there, she never got mutter. So L'chura, who said, over there you would say, Hoyel V'Ishtari Ishtari. And here the Gemara speaks it out. Milai Maida Ula. Don't you think Ula would be Maida? Shemra carry Balel Shmini? That in the event that the Mitzayra, Shechal Shmini Shaliyah Berev Pesach, would have seen carry Balel Shmini, not B'Yom Shmini, but the night before, the eve of, She'im Machdes Yadav L'Bahainus, that I don't think he would have said, Hoyel V'Ishtari Ishtari, that the Balkari is allowed to stick his fingers and his thumbs and his toes inside the Azara, because there was never a Hoyel V'Ishtari. There was never a time that it was actually mutter. Meaning, the Gemara assumes that Hoyel V'Ishtari Ishtari is only when the Mitzayr was Ra Keri B'Yom Hashmini. You know why? Because when he woke up in the morning, as soon as it was Heir Pnei HaMizrach, he was able to bring his karbanis. He was mutter, the Torah this second was matter. If you want, bring karbanis, and you could go ahead and do a biyah mixus inside the Azar. So the Torah was Lehedya matter. Al Zen Nemar, once the Torah was matter, it was Chal Heter, that's the lumdus of Hoyel V'Ishtari Ishtari. So now it's going to be mutter for the Balkari as well. But that's only when it's Chal Heter B'Poel. So the Gemara says, you want to shtel to Hoyel V'Ishtari Ishtari, you want to draw a parallel between a Mitzayr Balkari to an Eishes Ach Achos Isha B'Seder Gomer. I hear it klar, mit a ganze klarkeit. But it has to be that the Hoyel V'Ishtari was Chal B'Poel. Just like the Hoyel V'Ishtari was Chal B'Poel with the Mitzayr, where it was already mutter in the morning for him to do a biyah mixus. Now there's another issue. Al Zen Nama, Hoyel V'Ishtari Ishtari. So too over here, where there was B'Poel a heter on the Eishes Ach, and then all of a sudden now we have a new Erev Achos Isha. So B'Seder will say, Hoyel V'Ishtari Ishtari. Said, and that would explain why you need a allow. But that only works in one situation. It works if, number one, Reuven got married first. That's the first thing you need to establish. Not just that, Reuven died, and then afterwards Shimon went ahead and married his sister. That's the only time you can hear Hoyel V'Ishtari Ishtari. So the Gemara says, you're right. Efshataka. Elo ki itzterich aleh. Maybe the only time we needed aleh on the Brisa on Daf Gimel Amud Beis was heichad the nasa meis, v'meis, v'achakach nasachach. Erchanami, it's a doichik in the Brisa. Oh, but this is the first teretz of the Gemara. We actually got there. And the first teretz of the Gemara is that maybe, the reason we need aleh, and the reason there would have been a havamina, that there would be yibum even by arayas, even by chayve krisis. Hagama says not doichel loisa says sheyesh by karas, is because you would have thought that just like yibum can be doicha eshasach, yibum can be doicha shar arayas as well. What do you mean? This is one issa, that's two isurim. For that we have a knech known as hoyel ve'ishteri ishteri. What's the mekar? Minot tamer damin hoyel ve'ishteri ishteri. It's learned out from the obscure case of the Mitzayra. Shechal shmini shalayliya is be'erev pesach ve'ra keri bay bayayim v'tava. A Mitzayra Mechusik Kippurim, who's also Valkeri Tful Yaim, where his 8th day happens to be on the Erev Pesach, Hafla Vafela, where we say, Hoyel V'ishteri Ishri, that being that the Mitzayra is allowed to do a biyah and mix this into the Azara, we allow him to do it despite the fact that he's Valkeri as well. So too, in a case where it was Nasa Meis, V'meis, V'achakach Nasachai, we would invoke the principle of Hoyel V'ishteri Ishteri. That's why we need Aleh. At this point, it's only for that case. We have Al Kalpanim a Mahalach. We didn't have a mahalach. We started this on Daf Gimel, and we went through Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, and we waited until about 10 lines from the top of Ches Amud Aleph to at least have a mahalach. As Hashem, when we learned Daf Ches, we're going to see there are other mahalachim as well to answer the great kasha of time of the Kosev Rachmana Aleh.